District of Sports podcast, our sports podcast here at the Washington Times. I'm George Gerbo. A reminder that you can find us and download us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Just search District of Sports on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. And also to check out all of our sports stories at Wash Time Sports on Twitter, as well as at WashingtonTimes.com/sports, which is where you can find the excellent work of our sports reporters, Matt Paris and Andy Kostka, back with us once again. Good morning, gentlemen.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having us.
Good, absolutely. A lot to talk about here as we inch forward in the spring, as we get our minds set for what's coming in terms of the playoffs in the National Hockey League and the NBA. Let's hit first, though, on the just wrapped up NFL draft, which comes out in a lot of strong positives, Matt, for the Washington football team. They had 9 picks overall. They took 5 on defense, 4 on offense, and they took a long snapper as well to replace the recently released Nick Sundberg. But a lot of people happy up and down the board, and we'll get into details here in a second, but with the value they got for some of these picks and where they were able to get these picks seems to be the overall consensus for the WFT.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it says more about Washington's long-term strategy of how they want to build this roster. I mean, you look at a lot of their picks in the middle rounds, these were depth kind of picks. You know, it wasn't just a guy like John Bates, their tight end in the 4th rounder. He's not going to come in and start right away. He's going to be more of a blocking tight end. Same goes with the safety they took in the 5th round. You know, the most notable thing about this draft is they didn't draft a quarterback, and they didn't feel like they needed to because they signed Ryan Fitzpatrick in free agency. They brought back Kyle Allen. They brought back Taylor Heineke. And so, you know, you look on draft night and how some of these guys like Justin Fields were falling, but Washington didn't make that move to trade up for him. And so, you know, I think they're really pleased with the direction they're going. They really like Jamin Davis, like the linebacker they drafted in the 1st round. And, you know, every team is happy after the draft, you know, but I think these guys brought in players to help them take the next step.
And you had a good interview pre-draft with former NFL GM Mike Tannenbaum, who said that they, you know, if the opportunity came there and it wasn't too much of a reach to jump up, that maybe they should. The quarterback shakeout in that Mac Jones is the one that goes of the big 5 that everybody talked about pre-draft. He goes last of that group to New England at 15, but that doesn't seem like it would have been the kind of player that Washington would have traded up for.
Right. Yeah, no, I think of anyone they were most interested in Fields. And, you know, you look at the price that Chicago gave up, it wasn't actually that bad. It's a future first next year and an additional 4th next year, plus some other stuff within this year's draft. So it was 4 picks total. You know, the Bears can live with that, but I think Washington just looked at it and said, all right, we don't want to give away our picks next year just yet. They traded a future 5th rounder in this draft, but they got back a 6th and a 7th rounder, you know, to complete their haul. So I just don't think they were in a rush to do anything. And, you know, we saw the news with Aaron Rodgers this week, and, you know, who knows what the quarterback market looks like next week or next year with someone like Russell Wilson, if he's available, or Aaron Rodgers, if, you know, things don't shake out there. So it could be a really interesting market next year. And I think they're kind of anticipating that.
Next year or even next month at this rate. We've also kind of forgotten about, you know, Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback circus du jour. A month and a half ago, it was Deshaun Watson, and now he is tied up with women accusing him of sexual abuse, but also that situation still just seems unresolved in Houston. So there's a lot of things that'll still play out from that, I think, to be seen even before we get to training camps. Speaking of training camps, a guy that is going to help Washington, you mentioned Jamin Davis, the linebacker from Kentucky. They take him at 19 in the 1st round. Ron Rivera and the leadership at the WFT seem to like the pick in what he's going to give them in terms of versatility. You had the number 2 overall defense basically last year, and you've got that front line shored up with Davis. That they gives them some type of flexibility where he can play, I think, Matt, in a variety of different packages for them, and that's probably something they're going to like on that side of the ball.
He can, and Ron Rivera was on the radio yesterday, and he was saying that if he'll have to earn it, but they envision Davis being a three-down linebacker. Starting in their base package, going over to nickel. They really needed that type of player, someone who can drop back in pass coverage, explode through the gaps, and they really like him. Some draft analysts are concerned that maybe Davis, who was a one-year starter at Kentucky, maybe this was a flash in the pan. He doesn't have a lengthy track record, but Washington sees that as, all right, this kid's potential is just getting started, and we can really tap into something here if we develop him the right way. So there was a lot to like on film, and I think they saw that, and they were pretty sold on him early, which I thought was interesting because, we've heard throughout this draft process that Jamin Davis was a riser, that teams really grew on him as the draft went along, and he was picked in the first round. But back in February when Washington was first having discussions for the draft, Davis's name came up pretty early, and the scouts were sold, and then Mayhew got on board, and then Rivera. So they really liked this kid all throughout the process.
There's two other picks I want to hit on. Their second round pick at number 51 overall, Sam Cosmi, the offensive tackle from Texas. And you mentioned Davis kind of only starting for a year. It was interesting in this draft to see that, I don't want to say limited tape, but what we would traditionally call a limited amount of games played, whether it was you only started for a year. We talked about how Trey Lance had that one excellent national championship season at North Dakota State, played one game last year, and then he opted out. Cosmi opted out after 8 games last year. And of course, players across the NCAA had that option with everything that was going on related to the COVID-19 pandemic. But that has not, and in this draft, it did not hurt to just say, I'm going to take some time for me. I believe in what I can do. I believe that I can perform at the next level, and these guys working on themselves as opposed to just gutting it out for the sake of putting more games on tape. Cosmi ends up first team all Big 12. And I think, Matt, for Washington, this is somebody that you want to see starting opposite of Morgan Moses at tackle. He's probably going to, I assume, go into camp competing with Cornelius Lucas. But even if it's a few games or injuries on the offensive line are almost a given, and especially in what we're going to see for the first time ever in a 17-game season, this is going to be somebody that I think at some point this season is going to start for Washington at tackle.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Cosmi, in a sense, is kind of the complete opposite of Davis. He was a 3-year starter at Texas. He was a kid who really developed, started on the right side before shifting to left. They really liked his athleticism as well. He shares that with Davis. But, you think about what Washington had success with at left tackle. Trent Williams is a freak athlete. He can get out in space and make blocks that other tackles just can't do. And Cosmi isn't to nearly that level. Obviously he went in the second round, but he can get out, he can pull, he can create blocks down the field. And Washington was just really missing that sort of, that player at left tackle because, you look at their situation and Cornelius Lucas was fine. He's 29, he's entering the last year of his contract. If they went into that season and he had to play the whole year, I think they would be fine with it. But, this is an upside pick. This is someone who I think raises the ceiling of Washington's offensive line. And I think they're very happy with him, especially since I believe he was a captain at Texas too.
Mm-hmm. And the other guy that a lot of people are highlighting, and you've got a nice piece on him and what Washington's going to see out of him, is De'Ami Brown, the wide receiver from North Carolina, late third round pick at number 82 overall. Ran a 4.44 40-yard dash at the combine and is getting comps to Terry McLaurin, Matt, in what he can do. A guy he's going to be teammates with in Washington.
Yeah, Washington has really had a nice history here recently of hitting on third-round draft picks. Terry McLaurin in 2019, as you mentioned, and then Antonio Gibson even last year. He was their leading rusher, and he was a really great value pick. And now, can De'Ami Brown be that next guy? Well, he had a lot of, he really popped at North Carolina. He averaged 20 yards a catch. Of the guys who in college who averaged around that, he had the most yards of any of them. So it wasn't just, he was targeted. He had 55 catches, and doing that, he had over 1,000 yards if you do the math. And so that was really impressive. And they really love his burst. Obviously, he has great speed at 4.4, but North Carolina really used him in just a vertical route tree. Go down the field. You're not really gonna do any digs or curls or any intermediate routes. And he said he's excited to show that he can do that sort of stuff and that he's been working on that. But yeah, you look at Washington's situation and you have McLaurin. They signed Curtis Samuel, and you have now De'Ami Brown potentially on the outside, and you move Samuel to the slot. What are teams supposed to do? Who are you going to double team? Which way are you going to send the coverage? Is someone just going to get by the other guys? It presents a lot of challenges for opposing defenses, and that was Washington. That was obviously Washington's goal.
And if you're somebody who saw what Ryan Fitzpatrick did in his starts and playing time with Miami last year, you can almost draw some pretty similar comparisons to what you would hope to see him to be able to do here in Washington. Matt, let's round it out with just your thoughts. If you think that we're going to see any more personnel moves out of Ashburn, either by signings, trade, anything that is going to stick out, or it seems like this is how they're going to head into training camp here in a few months.
Yeah, I would say this is probably going to be most of their roster. The NFL reached the point now where if you sign a veteran, it doesn't count towards the comp pick formula. So, we'll see some big name veterans sign probably elsewhere, like Richard Sherman. He's still available. The guy to watch, though, I think with this specifically with Washington is Ryan Kerrigan. Obviously, their all-time leading pass rusher. He's still out there. Does he want to come back? I think that's more of a question. They would welcome him back with open arms, but he would be in a rotational role behind Montez Sweat and Chase Young, and is he really going to accept that for a second straight year? He has said that he believes he's still capable of producing at a full-time role. So I don't know if it's in the cards, but never say never, and he holds a lot of history here, and I think Washington would like him back, but does he want to sign here? That's what I'm going to monitor in the next couple of days, next couple of weeks here.
We will move on to hockey here in a sec. I will point out that you guys correctly, I reviewed the mock draft and correctly hit on 4 exactas. Jacksonville, New York, of course, taking Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson overall. Detroit at 7, you guys correctly had Penei Sewell going to them, the offensive tackle. And Pittsburgh taking Najee Harris, the first running back the Steelers have taken since Rashard Mendenhall over a decade ago. So congratulations there, and it was a good read. And find all of the pre-draft and post-draft coverage, of course, at WashingtonTimes.com/sports. Now, kind of what is going to be, I think, the topic that's going to stir the drink here in D.C. For the next week or so, as the Washington Capitals gear up and gear into the playoffs here. They are now they're in a tie for first place in the East Division, again presented by Mass Mutual, but they have the breaker just right now solely with the game in hand over Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has 3 games left to play. Washington has 4 games left to play, both with 71 points, and it very well could come down to these tiebreakers with regulation wins, which remove the shootout wins and the overtime wins, of which Washington has one more than Pittsburgh. And then the next tiebreaker after that would include overtime wins in that total, of which Pittsburgh has one more than Washington. But it's a team that is a mixture of banged up and dealing with some issues here and there. Evgeny Kuznetsov, Ilya Samsonov were scratched late yesterday before the game against the 6-3 win over the Rangers for disciplinary reason. Justin Schultz scratched due to injury. We saw Alex Ovechkin try to get out and skate on his first shift and just wasn't going to push it on his injured leg, officially termed a lower body injury. And they're going to be careful, obviously, with Ovechkin coming back. We just learned this morning, TJ Oshie was away from the team yesterday. We learned this morning that his father passed away. And so there's a lot of different personnel issues going on there. The biggest story, of course, though, coming last night, reverberating across the hockey world and even the sports world on the whole, Andy, is Tom Wilson. In the second period of last night's game against the Rangers, he was issued a double minor and a 10-minute game misconduct for kind of roughing Pavel Buchnevich in the back. then even past that, as the scrum is going on behind the net, he's able to get a hold of New York's Artemi Panarin's head and throws him helmetless down and drags him to the ice, which is, I think, the thing that caused a lot of consternation among hockey fans and non-Washington fans specifically. And there's a whole bunch that we're going to get into here with it. But on the face here, Andy, is the, and we'll add that he was fined $5,000 this morning by the NHL's Department of Player Safety. Punishment okay for the in-game punishment, and what appears is going to be just this fine of $5,000. Suitable to you? Should it have been more? Was it too much? He has been penalized multiple times over his career and was suspended 7 games earlier this season for elbow to the head of Brandon Carlo. So and that was like an in-game thing, whereas this is after a whistle behind the net here. Punishment meet the crime here. Should the league have done more? Do you feel that this is appropriate?
If you ask anyone on the New York Rangers, it was not appropriate. And I think if you ask any fan from the 30 other teams in the NHL, I think they would say, no, this was way too light of a punishment. It is funny, the NHL, when they came out with this morning saying that he was fined $5,000, the only thing they mention is the roughing of his forward Pavel Buchnevich. They don't even mention the stuff with Artemi Panarin, which to me was, obviously the punch to I guess the head area, maybe it was upper back on Buchnevich when he's laying face down on the ice. That's definitely unnecessary, roughing, whatever. But the extracurricular after that was definitely what stood out as like a wow. Okay, that's a little bit extra than we normally see. I asked Peter Laviolette about it last night. He thought it was just a scrum. His direct quote was, happens a lot. And I was thinking, like, does it happen a lot? Does it that often when we see this kind of thing? Yeah, so it was interesting to see. But I think, if you ask most people around the league, I think just with Wilson's history, maybe he got off a little bit light this time, considering that he has done things like this pretty frequently and has been suspended 5 times and has been fined, many dollars in his career.
Yeah, Matt, $1.3 million total over the course of his career in fines and 30 games total in suspensions, and we mentioned that it was 7 games already earlier this season. I'm all for the occasional face wash and guys getting into it behind the net and everything. But when I guess where we're seeing, we've tried to, and the league has tried to legislate the physicality out of the play between the whistles based on how much skill and speed and how this game has evolved into being less of a slog and more of a artistic version, for lack of a better term, of hockey. And I think it's this type of stuff when you see how close that it can be. If Artemi Panarin's helmet is able to stay on, he comes down, maybe we're thinking differently about it. But when you see a guy's, forehead clean, get that close to the ice where it could have been a fractured skull and potentially ruin the rest of his career, let alone his life, I think that's the thing that gets people, Matt, kind of up in arms a little bit about it, especially because of Wilson's track record.
Right. He broke remind me on the player's name in 2018, but on Pittsburgh, Zach.
Zach Aston Reese. Yeah.
Yeah, he broke his jaw a few years ago. So
yeah.
We've seen Wilson actually do physical damage, and he paid a huge price for it. The suspension was pretty lengthy, and it came at a terrible time for Washington in the playoffs. But, in terms of this instance, I'm watching, I pulled up the clip again just to make sure that I don't have Washington rose-colored glasses on or anything like that. And I just, the body slamming, it's not, I feel that because he's done so much worse that, I don't think this necessarily warranted a suspension. Now you could say his history with everything that he warrants more punishment because he has such a track record. But this, if this was any other player, and I know it's hard to separate the history, I don't think many players would be suspended for this, or that there would nearly be this many people up in arms. So, I just think it has to do more with his track record than the actual instance in this case, because I don't think, I don't think this was suspension worthy. I'll be honest.
Did you see him? Did you see him pull the hair? I mean, it seemed like there were things that were a little, I don't know, maybe suspension worthy. It was interesting. I can see both sides of like, he's being sure, but there were other factors in it too that, given his history and stuff, it's like, oh,
I kind of agree that like it's just in what we see, when you hear a whistle at the net or something like that and the stoppage, and it just kind of, I kind of, as Andy said, it's funny that Laviolette said happens a lot. It doesn't happen a lot. It happens occasionally. It doesn't happen a lot. And it doesn't happen in this type of very violent looking form, I would say.
Yeah. Well, the slow-mo version of it looks terrible. Like, let's be honest. But when you freeze things down to, a tenth of a second or whatever it is, everything is going to look bad. Like, it's happening in full fast. I mean, who even knows if he was intentionally going for their hair? Everything just happens in a split decision that, I think it's right for the NHL to try and clean up that behavior. You don't want to jeopardize a player's health like that. But, again, sometimes this stuff just happens. And, Wilson, he always seems to be around it, and that's probably not a coincidence. But, I think the more interesting thing is, why is the fine only $5,000? I mean,
and the league specified, the NHL Department of Player Safety specified in their tweet that $5,000 is the maximum, at least for this allowable under the collective bargaining agreement. It's kind of, Andy, the general problem that I have that has continued now under George Peros's leadership, at the former enforcer himself, many years played for the Mighty Ducks and other teams, LA Kings, and also previously under Brendan Shanahan's leadership at the Department of Player Safety, where they're kind of bound by their rules here after the fact. And I would argue that it is because of an inconsistent application of penalties and punishment on the ice during the game, when those guys can actually handle it. And then we get to after the game and it's like, well, the guys could have done this on the ice and they couldn't have. Like, for me, I think this is a match penalty. He gets the game misconduct. If you issue Wilson a match penalty, the fine scale goes up a little bit, and the match penalty puts him under, it's an indefinite suspension until the commissioner rules on the issue or the league rules on the issue. So, maybe that way you can get a game or two out of it, as opposed to something more violent. I do think the Brandon Carlo check on Boston's defenseman earlier this season was a more egregious violation, because of the league does not want you skating, charging into a guy and purposely raising your elbow or your shoulder, your upper body into the point of contact being somebody's head. You want to contact him in the body, that's fine. You want to contact him in the shoulder, that's fine. You can't be targeting the head. And I think if the league better ruled on these things on the ice, then you wouldn't have to worry about the outcry over, well, it's only 5,000. Our hands are tied because we can only fine him 5,000 after the fact, Andy.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think the Brandon Carlo, there wasn't even a penalty call on the ice.
That's part of my problem.
That definitely played a role in like why there was a suspension, because you have to kind of make up for things, in that fact. This one, I mean, he spent 14 minutes or so off the ice with the 10-minute misconduct, the double minor. So it was definitely, for an already shorthanded team, to then be without a star player for that long. I mean, the refs got it right on the ice, I think. Could it have been more? Yeah, I think a lot of people more. But your hands are kind of tied, and there's definitely inconsistencies with everything, which gives us something to talk about, I guess. So thank you, inconsistencies. But it makes it difficult, because you can look at two different things and be like, oh, why was it 7 games for the Brandon Carlo and not no games for this? I think maybe some of it has to do with just the rules, the kind of the fact that he charged into the boards, and this one was more of a maybe a little bit extra than just a standard melee, but kind of in that vein. Plus, there was the penalty on the ice, so they kind of took care of it at the time.
Wilson is second in penalty minute with his escalation of the 14 minutes there, as Andy mentioned, catapulted him into second in penalty minutes this year behind Max Domi. He, the son of former enforcer Ty Domi, and Wilson, if that holds for the final 4 games of the season, it will be the 5th season in the last 6 that he will have finished in the top 3 in penalty minutes in the NHL. More specifically, Matt, in terms of just positioning Washington for the playoffs, they're obviously going to make it. We mentioned, we'll add here that all 4 of those teams in the East have locked up their spots, so there is no movement. That the only movement that's going to happen is among the teams that are already in. Washington, Pittsburgh, Boston, and New York will be the East Division representatives, and they will play each other 1v4, 2v3 in the league's redesigned playoff format for this truncated 56-game season. But it's a guy you almost needed to not be the center of attention when you already have Ovi out, when you are already having issues in terms of injuries with Justin Schultz, and also now with this suspension. And I guess we'll hear from Peter Laviolette whether Kuznetsov and Samsonov will be back with the team. That reports to Tariq El-Bashir of The Athletic that both players were late to a team function, which was potentially the reason for the suspension. But Matt, you almost don't need Tom Wilson adding more fuel to the fire here or more distractions when the team has 4 games here left, 2 against the Flyers, 1 more against the Rangers to finish out this season.
No, yeah, this is the time of year that you want to be playing your best hockey, and it sounds like they're being as cautious as possible with Ovechkin, but at the same time, playing only 39 seconds last night and having to go back in the tunnel because it didn't feel right, that is a little concerning, because especially since Ovechkin felt good in the morning. Now maybe they're still being super duper cautious, and they are locked into they're locked into the playoffs. They don't know their seed yet, but I think it's more concerning. I'm not as concerned with Wilson as more so, Andy, you wrote about this, as the goalie situation. Like, what does Samsonov's suspension here mean for the potential starter in the playoffs? Like, is this a guy now that you can trust? Because, this isn't just a suspension because he missed a meeting. He also contracted COVID because he was in a room that maybe he shouldn't have been in with the rest of the Russian players on Washington's roster. And I think he had an ATV accident in Russia over the summer too, I believe, if that's correct.
Yeah.
This is the kid who was supposed to be their goaltender of the future, and it seems like Vitek now is maybe going to be the clear favorite to start. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't great timing from Samsonov. But I asked Laviolette the other day about, like, does he need to name a starter? Because you always want kind of to name a starter entering the playoffs. You want a go-to guy in net. He didn't seem at all concerned at the time. And definitely that was before the Samsonov suspension. Maybe he's changed his tune. But at the time he said, in this day and age of the playoffs, you can pretty easily rotate with 2 different goaltenders. I think maybe with Vanecek's performance last night, going forward with based off this Samsonov suspension, maybe he's going to kind of get the hat tip for game 1, and they'll see how it goes. But I don't think it necessarily means that they're going to pick one guy and kind of ride him for the entire playoffs. They've done it this entire season, rotating. So they might be cool with going with that. It would be funny if they did, just be based on history and what you want technically, but they don't seem necessarily that concerned about not having a one specific starter. And both Vitek and Samsonov have played well this season, all things considering. I mean, 2 young netminders in playing for a contender, that's a difficult spot to be in, but they both stepped up. Under 3 goals allowed per game, save percentages are over 900. They were pretty solid. But we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. It definitely wasn't great timing from Samsonov, if anything.
The quote from Laviolette was interesting. Just kind of how it's like, yeah, well, I guess we'll name a guy by the time the playoffs start. It just really was non-committal about it, and just the unique nature of it in how these two goaltender things go down, especially when you get to the playoffs, is eventually he'll find a guy to ride, and just by almost assumption, just be like, all right, this is our guy now. But it's still, I'm curious as to how there's nowhere to hide in this year's playoffs. It's not 1-8 as we had in the past. It is, these teams you've been playing for 56 games amongst yourselves, you get them for up to 14 more games in 2 rounds before what would be the conference final, with a potential matchup against Pittsburgh looming in what would be the second round of this playoff. But they're going to get Boston or New York, the Islanders potentially, and the Islanders are a team that's given them some fits over the course of the last, pretty much since the Stanley Cup in 2018. So that's something that's always in the back of your mind with the Capitals. The other team in town that is finally starting to catch up and pick up their game are the Washington Nationals. And we talked last time, Andy, about how this team maybe was disrupted and just didn't get its rhythm based on the positive COVID-19 tests and the other people based on contact tracing that were within the team that needed to step away, and that caused a delay in getting their season started against the New York Mets. Now the National League East resembles another division here in town, the NFC East, in the fact that the Nationals are at 500, and they've, after 7-3 record in their last 10 games and a sweep of the Florida Marlins, and that is good enough to put them in first place now.
That is the best part of it. Yeah, 500 team is in first place. It's good stuff.
They cannot, in the long term, we will note, finish 7-9 and win the division like the WFT did. But 12-12 right now is good enough for first place in the National League East. Nobody besides the Marlins have a positive run differential. The Marlins are at +4, and that's good enough to keep them in last place right now, 2.5 games behind the Nationals after the sweep. So everything, what's up is up, what's up is down, and what's down is up. But specifically, Andy, talk to me about how this pitching, which we knew was going to be a key, is now kind of finally coming around. We finally saw John Lester. He pitched 5 scoreless innings in his debut win Friday. Patrick Corbin, ERA, bringing it down. We're now to 8.1 ERA for Patrick Corbin. He got a win. And, of course, Max Scherzer, who, there is just nothing. I almost feel like we are undervaluing what Max Scherzer has brought to the Nationals over the course of his time here in Washington. Every single thing he does, and it's just like, oh, yeah, he's going to throw a 106-pitch, 9-strikeout complete game, and then less than 3 hours later be at the hospital as his wife Erica gives birth to their 3rd child. And it's just added to the Mount Rushmore of accomplishments of Max Scherzer, the 20-strikeout game, the no-hitter, everything. He just continues to wow, and I feel like I don't want to say take him for granted here in D.C., but just, almost, or just have become used to it a little bit, and should appreciate what Max Scherzer brings pretty much every time he goes out to pitch. But this team, buoyed by that pitching, Andy, has kind of righted the ship here. And at least, even at a 500 record, it puts them in first place. Yeah.
The funny thing is with Max, I mean, is there anything he can't do? That was just such a crazy story on Sunday with the whole, as soon as he finishes a complete game, no walk performance, 9 strikeouts, 1 run, just great pitching, runs to the hospital and welcomes their 3rd child for he and Erica, which is great. But the nice quote from Zimmerman after the game, was, he said something like, so often when you bring a dump truck load of money to a free agent pitcher, everyone is scared of, oh my, in 3 years, 4 years, you're going to regret that kind of cash for a free agent pitcher. But I think he said, like, Washington can almost feel like how much money they saved on that gigantic contract. That 7-year deal is now set to expire with Scherzer after the season, because he has been such a big part of everything the Nationals have been able to do. And he's showing it again. I mean, he's been the kind of steady force in this rotation when things weren't great for a lot of the star pitchers. But I do want to take a moment and recognize Eric Fedde and Joe Ross. for the first 9 wins the Nationals had, 5 of those came with Fedde and Ross on the mound. Those guys were not expected to be. I think Ross was kind of the slated to be the 5th starter. Both of them were in the rotation because Lester was out for so long after he was on the COVID-19 list and needed to work his arm back up. Strasburg's out as well with shoulder strain or soreness, I guess is the inflammation, I guess is the correct term there. So those two came in and they've kind of held their own. And that was big for the Nationals to get to 500. You know, they needed Eric Fedde and Joe Ross to kind of show what I think the Nationals always expected of them, but maybe they hadn't shown at a consistent enough level. That papered over some of the issues to get the Nationals to now this point where, yeah, you had Patrick Corbin. You know, he just threw 7 innings, 4 hits, 2 runs. That was a very steady performance from him. I think that was Saturday. That was John Lester with a promising debut on Friday night. Those are good things, and you're looking at the rotation suddenly, and you're like, okay, things are, kind of looking back to normal. You have Max doing Max things, just ridiculous things, basically. You have, Lester finally back after all this time. Strasburg, you're still kind of waiting on, but the pieces are coming together for that staff, and that's a good sign for the Nationals. They weathered the storm, which was a lot of short starts, and now you're starting to see the starters kind of do what they're supposed to be doing, which is what this team is built around.
And one of those pieces, Matt, remains, and the ageless wonder continues to be Ryan Zimmerman at 36, who is hitting .319 with 4 home runs and 10 RBI so far. He opted out last season due to the pandemic, and he's still playing, kind of sparingly at first base as the Nationals wait for Josh Bell, who was acquired over the summer from the Pirates, to heat up a little bit. But of all the places that you figured you're going to get the offense from, Trey Turner, Juan Soto, et cetera, I don't think most people would have expected Zim to be the guy, the former face of the franchise, and someday we'll have a number retired in that stadium, I believe, to be leading some of the charge here for Washington so far, Matt.
Right. Well, what's surprising to me is, we see guys all the time in spring training light it up, and those numbers temper off as the year goes on. But he's really continued that hot streak, and maybe him having that year off was good for him in the long run. Maybe he got his body back to where it needed to be. Not obviously you would want to be in baseball shape over that time, but he is a bit older now. He's not a player who can play every day, but he's still really important to their overall success. And that's the thing I don't know with the Nationals right now. It just seems like they have like a very small margin of error. If their pitching is not on, you could say that about any team, but especially with these guys, like if, when Strasburg went down to begin the year, it seemed like it was going to be kind of a chaotic a catastrophe just because, it didn't really seem like they had the guns to replace him. But like, can Fedde continue his solid performance? Can Ross, I'm not necessarily sold on everything that's happened yet, but luckily they are in a division that is kind of, you could say that about every team, because every team in this division seems like it's struggling a little bit.
Andy, let's round it out with the guy I mentioned, Trey Turner, who, last year he gets enough votes to finish 7th in the MVP vote in the National League. But there was kind of something that was missing in terms of his fielding and his defense, and that has improved. So far, he's saved 5 defensive runs above average, as you point out in your story on WashingtonTimes.com/sports. That's tied for first at the shortstop position in Major League Baseball. What changes did he make, whether it was positioning, conditioning, just kind of getting better situationally with depending on who's at the plate, to allow him to kind of fix that oversight in his game and kind of round out who he can be in this league? Dave, you have a quote from Davey Martinez, who says that he can be an MVP caliber player, and he certainly is trending in that direction so far.
Yeah, I think last year he wasn't bad. I think sometimes you take the analytics with a little bit of a grain of salt. The reason why his ultimate zone rating and stuff, what was so poor last season, it was -7, was because he made errors on relatively routine plays. So that's kind of like, it kind of knocked him a lot. What was when he was messing up when maybe he shouldn't be, and he would still make those web gems and stuff like that. But now you're seeing, I think Martinez talked a little bit about, he makes the plays he's supposed to make, and that makes, when he makes the spectacular, which he can do with his speed, it just makes that so much. One of the things they really worked on, they moved him back a little bit, and you see this with Victor Robles as well, who's been an improved defensive presence this season. They've been positioning Robles a little deeper in the outfield just because they trust his speed. They know he can get to the ball. If it's a shallow ball, he can make up ground. Same thing with Trey. I mean, he had this running barehand play with bases loaded and 2 outs. Man, that was against the Blue Jays, maybe April 28th or so. That he charges from his heels are on the outfield grass, and he charges in and scoops it, in the infield grass, and fires a strike to first. That shows, like, yeah, he can make up the ground pretty easily. But the fact that he's playing a little bit deeper, that allows him to get to the balls, deep in the hole. He had a diving play the other day against Jesus Aguilar. That was one of those where he's diving to his right, stands up, and I think he also is really paying attention to, I know Aguilar is not that fast of a runner. Even though I had to dive in the hole, I can take a shuffle step before I throw this ball to first. And just those little things. It works a lot on his backhand. We've seen a lot with the double plays he's turned. So he's putting a lot of work in with Tim Bogar on the double plays. It's not always the standout, but he's making the standouts, I think, and those are even more impressive just because he's also making the routine plays how he's supposed to be at a higher clip this season. But that's kind of, he was always a pretty good defender. I think last little bit of a blip, and it says a lot about how great he was at the plate, that even with maybe a little bit of shaky defense, that he was still 7th in MVP voting. This year he should be up there as well, hitting above 300 again. He's kind of the 5-tool player, and I think it just when he does this kind of thing, it just, maybe if you're the Nationals, you cringe a little bit because you can think about that long-term extension they want to sign with Trey, and you think, oh, that value is really skyrocketing. And I think he's proving that he's one of the best shortstops in the game, if not the best, honestly, just with what he's been able to do in the field, at the plate, on the base paths. It's pretty impressive.
309 so far at the plate for Trey Turner, 6 home runs, 10 RBIs in 24 games this year. Washington will need that to continue if they hope to get out of the even mark that they're at right now and hold on to that first place spot in the National League East. Guys, we thank you as always. Matt, let everyone know where they can find you on socials and your work.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Matthew_Paris, and you can find my work at the Washington Times, in the Washington Times, and on the Washington Times website. It's easy.
And very easy. WashingtonTimes.com/sports. And Andy, for you on socials?
Yeah, same place for the website. Check it out. Read Matt's stuff as well. He's great. For social, you can follow me on Twitter at AFKOSTKA. Feel free to give me a follow. Hopefully you see some dog photos on there too. Always posting those.
We always need the levity. It's always good. Anytime something to make us smile during the day. It's a little bit different. It's always welcome. And a reminder, as always, to find the District of Sports podcast wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. Just search District of Sports in your favorite podcast app. And again, at WashingtonTimes.com/sports is where you can find the great work of Andy and Matt. For Matt, for Andy, I'm George. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.